Welcome. Good afternoon. Delighted you joined us. My name is Lance Wilkie. I lead our Midwest business here at BTS, which of course is the home to many fast-moving consumer goods companies. And so it is an industry that is very near and dear to my heart. We're delighted to bring you our FMCG leadership scorecard experience. Joining me are my colleagues. Corey, can I hand it over to you?
Hey everyone, my name is Corey Jacobs, director in our sales and marketing practice, worked with lots of consumer goods companies, and excited to talk to you today a little bit about consumer centricity. Bhavik.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm also based in Chicago for BTS, and my name is Bhavik Modi, and I'm a part of our innovation and digital transformation group. And I want to just thank you all for joining us today. And at BTS, we've had the privilege of partnering with many fast-moving consumer goods companies around the world. And what we've seen is that their businesses have evolved, their strategies have evolved before COVID, during COVID, and certainly as we start to emerge from the pandemic. And what we've tried to do is to compile our research internally based on the work that we've done with these firms, as well as external research on what we're seeing across the board and across the consumer goods industry. And I'll start off today with our punchline. And the punchline is this, that today's FMCG leaders, they must think big and small. What we mean by this is that there is a convergence taking place between large scaled companies that are starting to understand the benefits that they have of leveraging their scale and how to do that effectively. And that convergence is coming along with smaller companies, upstarts, fast-growing firms that are smaller and starting to realize that, hey, they have a distinct advantage too in today's world around being more consumer-centric, being digitally native. And when we work with companies across that spectrum, we notice that these companies, the mindsets and the skill sets that they need to start merging together. And one trend that I think many of us have seen in recent years, and certainly accelerated through the pandemic, is direct to consumer. And I can think of all of the boxes that show up every day at my condominium and how quickly that has changed consumer habits, and how quickly that has changed business models for many different companies. Whereas you had previously many different intermediaries that were taking a cut, now you can certainly expand your margins by going directly from production all the way to the consumer. And if you look across the board, you're noticing many industry stalwarts, they're rushing into this trend of this direct to consumer. These existing companies are starting to join the wave. On one end, that is acquisition, partnership, and investment. Companies like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, they've been heavily investing in getting into the DTC space. On the other end, when it comes to personalization, when it comes to taking core brands, existing brands, and making it easier for consumers to access them, you're noticing many traditional FMCG companies selling their existing brands directly to consumers. This is an example from Heinz, right? Where you can personalize what's on the can, you can personalize the entire experience of what bundle arrives directly from Heinz at your door. Same thing goes to Pepsi. Pepsi, during the pandemic, they debuted two DTC websites, pantryshop.com, snacks.com, where shoppers could order an assortment of PepsiCo's trusted, loved food and beverage brands. And one of the leaders from PepsiCo had this to say. And what I found particularly compelling about this quote are some of the new skill sets that are mentioned. Being native digitally, being entrepreneurial, and being consumer-centric are some of the most commonly cited trends that we're seeing amongst leadership teams and amongst FMCG leaders of how they're building their business of the future. The other thing that we're noticing for companies is that they're embracing a range of small company mindsets. For example, you notice many different campaigns kicking off on platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo from individuals and small groups, but you might not notice the same thing happening from Procter & Gamble, where P&G actually created an Indiegogo campaign for a product that they called DS3, which was next generation cleaning that was sustainable, had a low environmental impact, and they raised money through backers using that experimentation at a smaller scale that you see from companies And then when they realized that it was working, that there was some sort of a product market fit, they leveraged the scale that they have as a big company and launched the actual product that went into the market. This is commonly seen. And today's FMCG leaders, they need to embrace both of those mindsets, being an experimenter, being consumer centric like you would at a smaller firm, while realizing that you've got the scale often to scale up very quickly and capitalize on consumer insights. And we're certainly at BTS following many other trends, everything from the rise of private label and challenger brands, different marketing trends, personalization, self-care, health and wellness. But what I want to do today is focus on three. And the three I want to focus on are faster and easier delivery options, sustainability, values around brands, and digital offer personalization. Let's start with sustainability, or faster and easier delivery options, right? If you think about what was launched during the pandemic and what are the impacts that they had to the supply chain, you saw different membership services like Walmart Plus launch. You saw the rise of a heavily venture-funded company like GoPuff extending its offer to where they're not just promising delivery in days or hours, it's minutes, right? Where you can access different consumer brands faster and in a more convenient way than ever before. For companies like Mondelez, Hippies, Pura, you're seeing a strong dedication and commitment to what consumers are saying. And consumers are saying that they care about sustainability. They care about brands that reflect their values, and they're willing to switch products. In fact, 47% of internet users said that they switched products or services after a company violated their personal values. And so being consumer-centric, understanding the consumer certainly plays a role in what your brand promise is. And then finally, personalization. This has been a trend that's been around for a long time, but it's been accelerated by new digital technologies. It's not just TikTok personalizing your feed. You see companies like BarkBox determining a very personalized plan for your pet. L'Oreal with a new direct-to-consumer offering a very specific formula for your hair. There's more and more personalization that's taking place that is accelerated by new digital technologies. And what we've done is captured some of these insights in our white paper, focused on FMCG leaders needing to think big and embrace being small in 2021. And so for today's program, we're not going to be covering the entire white paper, but we'll focus on three key components of it. Component number one is on consumer-centric leadership. Component two, supply chain being a strategic enabler. And finally, how do you embed digital IQ or digital literacy within your organization? And we've created a series of scorecards where you can assess where your brand, your function, your organization sits today versus some of the leading firms that are both growing and at scale in the FMCG space. I want to go ahead and start off with consumer-centric leadership. And for that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Corey. Corey, you're on mute.
Classic. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining again. I'm excited to talk a little bit here about consumer centricity for leading consumer goods firms today and in the future. I want to start by posing a few questions to everybody. These are questions from our scorecard. And when we look at consumer centricity, as well as some of these other shifts, we think about them at several different levels. So looking at these questions here, you can see that we start by thinking about you and your peer group and your ecosystem, how well you can adapt to changes in the industry, and then think at a more narrow level around your company, your brand, how well you bring your brand promise to life for consumers, and then how well you target your different channels with strategies that are personalized to those shoppers. And then finally, look at the consumer itself. How deeply can you personalize and deliver an experience that is tailored to the individual and to what they want as a consumer interacting with your brand? So what we'd like to do is actually invite you to think about these questions for your own organization or your own brand, and let us know where you see strengths or opportunities in engaging consumers in these ways. So what we'll do is launch a poll here. You'll see these 5 questions pop up on the screen, as well as a rating scale from 1 to 5 for each of these questions. If you rate yourself a 1, it would indicate that you're lagging the industry. If you rate yourself a 5, it would indicate that you see your organization as industry leading in this regard. So let's go ahead and take a couple of minutes, fill out your thoughts on these questions, and then we'll take a look at the results. Can we take a look at the results, please?
Yeah, Corey, it looks like we've got, for the first question, most people say that in terms of how strategic partners react and respond to trends happening across the industry, it's between 3 and 4, closer to industry leading. Second question on how the company, how your organization understands these shifts. Again, tilted towards industry leading results, 3, 4s, 5s. And across the next few, the only one, Corey, that I'd see some laggards in is on the channel, where you've got a few 2s, and then in the consumer, which is really interesting, where you're seeing several 1s and 2s in terms of how they feel their performances.
Cool. Thank you, Bhavik. I appreciate the readout on the results there. And that's really interesting. And that actually aligns to really where we want to take the conversation here today. As we think about getting closer and closer to our consumers, we obviously recognize that there's a need to think about consumers at a smaller and smaller segment and a smaller and smaller scale. So the question that we ask whenever we consider these trends is, who has the advantage? If you're a large firm or you're a smaller digitally native or upstart company, where is your advantage when it comes to consumer centricity? As a large firm, you have the ability to access and activate consumer data, use tools and technologies that are available to you to get a really clear understanding for what your consumers might need today. And then you can flex your business depending on what you learn. However, smaller digitally native upstart companies, they have their own advantages. They were born oftentimes in this digital world, built on a go-to-market strategy that's fit for purpose with today's digitally literate consumer. So there are different advantages that large and small firms have when it comes to delivering on consumer expectations. And what we want to do today is think about how, regardless of the size of your organization, you can deliver better and more consumer value across your consumer's life cycle. So there are a couple of different ways that the best organizations think about their consumers. And the first way in which they do that is to take a look backwards. Just like we mentioned a moment ago with large firms, they achieve a single view of their consumer. They take lots of disparate data sources and use it to create a profile for each individual consumer, and then use that to target their marketing and personalize their offering across every touch point with that consumer. However, that's not enough. What the best firms are doing today is actually looking forward. They're predicting where there may be potential opportunities to deliver consumers more value and predict what consumers may not even know themselves, where there might be opportunities to deliver gain points or value to consumers as they interact with brands like yours. So the best firms are doing both of these things. And I want to focus here today on the second part that is a little bit more difficult, about recognizing consumers' unspoken, unmet, or even unrecognized needs. So why is this so important? Well, today, we all know that there are more and more touch points for consumers across every shopping journey. There's a proliferation of new channels and touch points in which we need to make an impression on consumers and think about what they're doing, how they're feeling in each of those moments. We also know that consumers expect to be treated like a person, not a number, not a data point, whenever they're interacting with your brand. Now, this is an obvious and easy to address challenge when you're working with consumers in stores or even in some of your direct consumer channels. But in a world where it's so fragmented, really understanding what they need at a personal level, at a human level, is much more difficult. To bring this to life, we can look at a couple of examples. I've chosen a couple here, one of which you may be super familiar with, and that's Dollar Shave Club. So Dollar Shave Club burst onto the scene in 2010 with a pretty funny set of advertisements. But what really helped them grab a large share of consumers is that they recognized that there were some unmet opportunities to deliver value to men who shave. What they recognized is that not all men were excited about going to the store and picking out new razors every month. They were actually more content to just shave with old rusty blades and maybe get really bad razor burn. They didn't recognize that there might be a different way to interact with a brand and get their shaving needs met. So on comes Dollar Shave Club to the scene, and they recognize that they can take some of the effort out of that journey for their consumers, even when their consumers didn't know that was possible. And of course, we all know how that story ended. Bhavik actually shared some of the end of that story a few moments ago. On the right-hand side, you can see a picture of actually a company here in Chicago located just about a 10-minute walk away from where I am right now. This company is called Mugsy Jeans. If you haven't heard of them, I recommend that you go check them out. I promise you I'm not being paid to provide an advertisement on their behalf. But Mugsy Jeans is doing something really innovative right now. They recognized that consumers, especially men right now, are spending a little bit more time working on fitness. And as a result, the shape of their bodies are changing. And as the shape of our bodies change, of course, the way that our clothes fit needs to change as well. And so Mugsy Jeans has been quite innovative in thinking about how to reach out to consumers who are struggling to find pants that fit and give them an experience that helps them feel more comfortable trying on jeans or working with a brand that understands what's changing in their life. So these are two brands that have done a really nice job of identifying where there are pain points and where there are gain points in their consumers' life cycle and have disrupted industries along the way. So what can we do to adopt the same mindset and apply it to our business? At BTS, we're big believers in customer journey mapping. I'm sure some of you have gone down this line of thinking or do it all the time, but we want to talk about why it's so important here today. Customer journey mapping gives us an opportunity not just to lay out and visualize our consumers' life cycle, but also think about how they're feeling and where there might be unrecognized opportunities to deliver value. So a customer journey map or a consumer journey map allows us to identify where there's opportunities for disruption, where there's opportunities for innovation, and where we may be vulnerable. So let's take a look at how this works. It starts by identifying every step in your consumer's journey or in your customer's journey and thinking about what happens to them. But it has to go further. It also thinks about what the emotional or mental state of the consumer is at every point in that journey. And a customer journey map can be as detailed or as simple as you need it to be. The best customer journey maps think really holistically about every moment in the consumer's life cycle and every opportunity to make an impression or a measurement of how they're feeling and how they're interacting with your brand. So let's bring this to life a little bit. On the screen, you can see an Equinox gym. Anyone who lives in a big city is probably familiar with this brand. And what Equinox has done extremely well is optimize their entire life cycle for their consumers, or so they thought. Right? We have a large brand like Equinox that has thought about their sales model all the way from when someone evaluates joining their gym to when they get rid of their gym membership. They may not have recognized that there was opportunities for disruption somewhere in this customer's journey, but someone else did. Everyone here, I'm sure, is familiar with Peloton. Peloton recognized that there were unmet needs, opportunities to deliver more value to these consumers that had historically taken for granted that they must go to the gym to use high quality equipment and interact with their peers in an environment that helped them stay true to their fitness goals. What Peloton recognized is that not everybody wants to go to the gym. For a lot of people, just finding the time in your morning to go and get to the gym, come back, take a shower was actually quite challenging. And they also recognized that some of the best parts of Equinox's experience or any big box gym experience could be replicated at home. The social environment, the music, the interaction with an instructor or your fellow classmates. So what Peloton has done is really transform the fitness industry. We see many fast followers in the connected fitness space, but they're meeting an unmet or unrecognized consumer need that many gyms had failed to capitalize on in the past. And it's this mode of thinking, this way of really being proactive about your consumer's life cycle and where there may be opportunities to add more value that we're excited to talk about here today. So To summarize, consumer journey mapping or consumer centricity today, it starts by understanding every step in your consumer's life cycle. So you can see Aisha and Wahid here on their journey to buy a new home. This is the first thing we need to do when we build the customer journey map. The next thing we need to do is empathize, to think about what might Aisha and Wahid be saying, what might they be doing, thinking, or feeling as they go through this journey, and where are their troughs, where are their peaks in this consumer life cycle. And through that thinking, we can recognize where there are opportunities to deliver value, where are their pain points, where are their potential gain points, and what can we do differently? How can we disrupt this consumer's, the normal consumer experience and deliver something unexpected that sticks? And so these are the opportunities that we as a consumer goods organization would be looking for to help change and deliver value against these gain points. So our takeaways, when it comes to consumer centricity today, large firms, you have to stay ahead of not just your competitors, but your consumers. You have to recognize their gain points before even they're aware of them. And as a small digitally native or upstart firm, you are literally born because there are unrecognized consumer needs. And then you're able to capitalize and take advantage of those needs and deliver on these consumers' expectations. And Bob, can you just build one slide for me here?
Sure.
Thank you. And here's the takeaway. If you're not actively searching for your consumers' unmet needs, or if you're not searching for gain points today, you will fall behind, because someone almost certainly is looking at your consumer's journey and thinking about where there are opportunities to deliver more value. Muggsy Jeans, Peloton, Dollar Shave Club, all of these companies exist today because they found something that incumbent companies had not. That's the power of consumer centricity today. I'm excited to talk with you more about it. But first, I'll hand it over to Lance to walk us through supply chain as a strategic enabler.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Corey. Let's move on to supply chain, where, frankly, all of the strategies that Corey just talked about could go to die if we don't have supply chain as a strategic enabler. So as you think about this, there's so much pressure in the short term to find productivity, make up for inflation on raw material, ensure timely supply. Over and over and over again, we can end up deprioritizing that more strategic view of supply chain, can't we? And as COVID pressed us as an industry, the organizations that understood these pressures and market opportunities the best across all of their functions, supply chain included, were able to quickly pivot. So, look, are we going to see another COVID in our lifetime? Who knows? But these hyperbolic times help to demonstrate who is more or less prepared. And that's what we want to talk about here. And of course, apply our notion of both big and small. Going forward, supply chains, you're undoubtedly going to face increased uncertainties, could be pandemic, weather, geopolitical, sustainability. Think about the topics we've talked about here: personalization, e-commerce, omnichannel. All of these things complicate our supply chains. We're facing shorter and tougher business cycles, which is an empirical fact. And we've got an expanding and more diverse and demanding consumer base. You add all of that up, and it gets to be very difficult to operate supply chains. COVID was simply the most pointed example of this. So if we think about what has happened over the last 18 months, take a look. The experts said it's probably the worst fill rate we had seen by over 1,000 basis points. It was very commonplace to see empty shelves. And as we think about all of the strategic imperatives over the years, lean initiatives, reduce inventory so we can maximize cash flow, reduce suppliers so we can gain more buying power and simplicity, really enhance bottlenecks. The industry, out of necessity, got really serious about SKU rationalization. Of course, that constant battle, cutting off the tail, figuring out what impact that's going to have on our ability to grow and dazzle consumers. And that ongoing tension that's always going to exist in our business between growth and complexity. Well, guess what? That complexity is not going to go anywhere. Some of it is created externally. Some of it's created internally. For example, I know many of you, this is very commonplace to acquire other companies. Take a look at this study. You look at serial acquirers over the last 10 years or so. You take a look at them compared to their peers. You look at the very above average 3-year average EBITDAs, and then they're actually getting rewarded by the marketplace too, as measured by their PE ratios. So where do you think these trends are going to go? There's going to continue to be an incentive to participate in M&A by FMCG companies, which is going to continue to wreak havoc on supply chains. And so all of that is to say, let's come back to our framework here as we think about supply chain as a strategic enabler. You see our same 5 buckets, but we're using a bit of a different lens now. Rather than consumer centricity, I want you to think about your supply chains and the organizations that you work in. And if we can launch the poll, we'll go ahead and do the same thing. 1 to 5. 1, we're lagging the industry. 5, it's a strategic differentiator for us. I'll give you a minute to answer those questions.
And Lance, we're seeing a good amount of responses here, and the mix is between 3 and 4 across the board for all of the questions. Closer to industry leading. Some of the ones that are industry lagging would be in terms of channel, and then also in terms of company, synchronizing risk within an organization as well, seem to have the most 2s and 3s.
Perfect. Thank you, Bhavik. Those are a couple of things that we'll talk about here as well, as we think about company and channel as it relates to supply chain as a strategic enabler. Perfect. So let's get into the conversation here. Again, let's go ahead and revisit big and small. It's fairly obvious, but we can think about it like this. So our larger firms, of course, are going to have additional options and flexibility that often comes at the expense of cash flow and margin, but we've got less exposure to disruptions. Those smaller digitally native firms that Corey was talking about, typically fewer brands, fewer SKUs, a more niche audience. So they are going to have more exposure to disruptions, less flexibility, fewer options, but typically drive higher margins, which of course is what makes them so attractive to purchase in the first place. Now, look, as we talk about supply chains improving, I think our heads go to a lot of what we're reading out there, a lot of what we're experiencing in the organizations as it relates to the technological advances. Of course, things like AI and the Internet of Things are going to help supply chain, but that's not necessarily where we want to spend our focus and our time here. We actually want to focus on the people side of the equation. And with the central conflict being this, historically, we look at supply chain as a place where we cut costs and try to get lean. And increasingly, we want to look at supply chain as a part of our business that needs to be resilient and doesn't just focus on getting cost per unit down as much as it can. We've got to be able to withstand shocks. We just said all the reasons why complexity is going to increase. We've got to be able to foresee market and consumer shifts so we can pivot accordingly. And we've got to integrate acquisitions, as we said, and respond to market conditions. Now, look, lean, of course, has something to do with this. Think of an example of that. Mattel recently undertook a great deal of supply chain simplification. They found they had 500 varieties of the color red, which is a tad bit more complex than they thought was necessary. But of course, this always begs the question, right? As we're going to streamline, we have to be careful what we cut. Could we get caught in a reactionary mode to overnight changes in consumer preferences? Are those consumer preferences and changes lasting when we think about a COVID environment? Are we going to cut something that when consumers come out of quarantine, they'll be clamoring for? That's why we're going to talk a bit about what we can do with supply chain and building that resilience. And the first aspect of that we want to talk about is this. I'm going to pick up on what Corey talked about, customer centricity or consumer centricity, not just for marketing. We think about all the snowballs that were lobbed at our business over the last 18 months, the agility that we wanted to be able to act with. How valuable is it to be able to have a supply chain business that has deep understanding consumer, customer, market dynamics and trends, and to be able to have a conversation across the entire business? Good example of this is what we saw happen at Mondelez last year. And in fact, they were able to, during the throes of COVID, actually have unprecedented market share gain. So Q2, 85% of the base business actually picked up share. And since then, what that has done is emboldened them, of course, to continue to simplify. A little bit out of necessity, but it's also steeped in those insights. And so what they're finding is cleaner shelves translate better, both to the customer and consumer. Retailers are demanding simplicity in the face of all of this complexity, and consumers simply want a faster and simpler shopping experience. And so while algorithms can assist with these SKU cutting decisions, it's going to be tough to find tools that can incorporate the entire universe of factors in SKU review as we think about impacts on market share, margin impact, buying power, product attributes, brand equity, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you think about it, SKU proliferation decisions has to be an area where we incorporate supply chain. And as we think about the modern supply chain leader, they are consumer and customer centric. Give you another example here, stepping slightly outside of our industry. For those of you that know Goodfair, you're a Houston-based organization that is really the first to be able to successfully launch online thrift store. There's a surging demand for secondhand retail, to be sure, but there hasn't really been a player that's been able to take advantage of this in an online setting, despite all the success that other industries and companies have had. And you think about that experience, it's very much going into the shop and picking up article after article and trying it on, right, to see. It doesn't necessarily translate to online, and yet they've been able to do it. And how? Well, you can see their assortment online here. They believe in bundling items by theme, by material. Now, that may sound like a nightmare trying to offer thrift store online, but what you can see here is every part of the business, the value proposition working together with the supply chain to be able to deliver on the consumer promise, to deliver on secondhand retail, which a lot of people value, and actually have success in this kind of a setting. And so using bundling, and again, supply chain talking to the rest of the business to be able to deliver on that promise. Otherwise, the entire consumer promise would get submarined, as well as the business model. Number two, as we talk about building resilience, we've got to take risk planning to the next level. And so, of course, supply chain is all about risk. We talk about forecasting a lot in the industry, but let me ask you all in this meeting right now are leaders in your business. What happens when you put a plan or a vision together and you share it with your team? Does everybody speak up? Is dissent okay? Is it okay to question? Is it okay to potentially squash the positive vibes that you're trying to set? What sort of form do you create that will encourage various questions and perspectives into the plan? And that's the whole point. That's what we want to talk about here with resilience, so that if you do bring up dissent, you don't feel like the poo in the pool, which is often why those perspectives don't get voiced. What we want to do from a risk standpoint is create something called prospective hindsight. Prospective hindsight. Studies have shown that if you can simply put your team in a place where you're imagining an event that has already occurred, so you're literally sort of transporting yourself into the future and then looking backwards, you increase you and your team's ability to correctly identify the reasons for future outcomes, both positive and negative, by 30%. So the whole notion then of risk assessment becomes not about looking forward and forecasting, but actually looking backwards and backcasting. And the way that many companies will do this is through a process that we call risk storming. Risk storming gives you three advantages. It has three steps to it as well. The first is you actually transport yourself in the future. Imagine a state where things have failed, and you start to list all the reasons why it would have failed. Second step, you actually start to rank those by impact and likelihood. And then, of course, the third step is about identifying and either mitigating or avoiding those risks in the future and creating the plans to do so, creating that prospective hindsight. And doing this gives you three distinct advantages. Number one, it legitimizes that risk decision. People don't feel like the poo in the pool. They actually can bring up the reasons why this may not work or why we need to rethink our plan. The second thing it does is this. There's a lot of talk these days about creating diversity, right, in our discussions, challenging, problem-solving, decision-making. This is the kind of systematic process where you can create a more diverse forum to discuss risk and mitigate for it. And the third thing it does is, as you legitimize it, as you bring in more diverse voices, you create a common language and framework. One problem a lot of FMCG companies have is every different part of the business is assessing risk in a different way, different language, different assessment. It actually gets very difficult to act against. And so we need to create a common language and a common system for measurement by which all parts of the business, supply chain included, can actually identify and mitigate for risk. The third aspect to building resilience is this. Supply chain, boy, it requires a lot of very specific expertise, doesn't it? We need them to be experts in their parts of the business, technology experts, et cetera, et cetera. But the most successful supply chain leaders, they're generalists, they're not specialists. You think about, take a look at the way that one of our clients defined excellence and leadership expectations for what they call a general manager. This is the leader of an operational setting. You see the headlines and what it means to be a market and business leader just as much as a people leader and just as much as it means to champion change and innovation in the supply chain. So it is very much about creating generalists as much as specialists. And so we're looking for a jack of all trades as we think about our supply chain leaders that can engage in that conversation around growing market share versus reducing cost per unit, holding higher inventory versus the impacts that has on free cash flow, having the conversation around growth strategy versus operational efficiency. And so increasingly, the best organizations are going to continue to enhance their supply chains, making them a true strategic differentiator. And if you take away just one thing here, as we think again through our lens of large and small and the advantages that each has, the whole point is to get to a place of resilience and not just cost cutting, getting a leader and a function that can actually engage with the rest of the business to enable those consumer priorities. From there, why don't we talk a little bit about those digital tools? Can I hand it over to you, Bob?
Absolutely, Lance. And just to recap what we've heard so far, because we've covered quite a bit of content, right? I think Corey went into the importance of consumer centricity, focusing on gain points, unexpressed needs. And we often focus on consumer pain points, but the gain points are things that they're already solving. They don't realize they're a problem, right? That's number one. Number two, Lance just talked about looking outside our swim lanes. And oftentimes in FMCG and the CPG industry, we have really, really good functional leaders that are really good at swimming in their own lanes. But today, especially in supply chain, having a more generalist mindset, being able to see what's going on the other end of the pool is incredibly important because supply chain is now a strategic enabler. And the second piece, or the third piece to this, is embedding digital IQ. A lot of these things, whether it's consumer centricity in a virtual context, whether it's having IoT technologies in your supply chain, they require a certain level of digital literacy and digital IQ. And if you asked BTS 10 years ago how we would think about strategy execution, we used to often show this framework. We called it E equals AMC, where we said successful strategy execution involves three things. Number one is strategic alignment, having a common understanding amongst your employees of where we're going as an organization. Is everyone on the same page about the direction that we're in? The second component was mindset and multiplying that by the alignment, right? So mindset is, okay, we know where we're going. Do we actually believe in that direction that we're going in? And then the third component we talk about would be capability. Do we have the skills to get there? Alignment, mindset, capability, E equals AMC is how we used to think about it. And in that capability bucket, the way we would frame this up was that capability is financial literacy, understanding the levers that turn your business and make it successful, and business acumen. Well, today in 2021, especially in consumer goods companies, this definition is expanded to where it now includes data literacy and digital IQ. Now, most of us are very familiar with the importance of data literacy, and we're seeing a growth of hiring, especially for data scientists across organizations. But when it comes to digital IQ, there's still a bit of fuzziness that we've noticed as we've talked to clients, and that there's a bit of a mystery. There's a bit of a misery on new technologies like AI and machine learning and what they can do, how to implement them, and how to bring these technologies to your teams. And so what we've noticed at BTS is that, for successful firms moving forward, they really need to embrace this concept of the skill sets and mindsets surrounding digital IQ. And this is proven out by research that was done by McKinsey, where they looked at consumer goods in comparison to other industries, and they noticed that consumer goods is down there with infrastructure as one of the least digitally mature industries out there. And so what we tried to do is compile a list of questions similar to what Corey and Lance showed that consumer goods leaders should be asking when it comes to their organization and their leaders' digital IQ. Everything from how well your industry and your peer group are capturing the benefits of their digital investments, how fast your organization is to implement, utilize new tools, how effective your brands, as we get to the brand manager level, have been at growing their market share using technology, your integration with customers, your ability to gain insights, and your consumer understanding. How well do you understand how technology influences decisions as consumers are making choices? And what I'll do is once again launch our final poll of the day that's focused on digital IQ. And I'd love to hear the results from you all in terms of how you feel your companies and your organizations are at capturing the benefits of digital literacy and digital IQ. So seeing a lot of people mentioning that their peer groups, they might be a little bit lagging in understanding what competitors and other folks in the industry are doing. How fast your organization is to implement and utilize tools. We're noticing several people are saying that we're fast, where there's a lot of 3s and 4s there in terms of brands. 3s and 4s, again, integration with customers, 3s and 4s, a few 2s popping up on the channel side of things. And then finally for the consumer, pretty solidly at 3 there. So with that, we've got some good data here in terms of what we're seeing, some of the trends. And what I want to focus on is companies and how fast what we're noticing at BTS, organizations that are successful are at implementing and utilizing new digital tools and utilizing their digital investments. And this brings us to this concept of digital transformation, right? Digital seems to be the big buzzword across FMCG right now in terms of what leaders, CEOs, they're talking about. And every day in the news, if you're following industry publications, you see what companies like Mondelez, what P&G, Coca-Cola, Kraft Heinz, they're doing to build innovation centers, innovation hubs, new experiments, digital technologies to successfully lead their digital transformation. And we're seeing a lot of cash that's flowing into these digital initiatives. But the problem is that the expected results of these initiatives fail to materialize. And many of the leaders that we surveyed reported poor returns on digital investments based on research that was done by the Harvard Business Review. And so you might be asking, okay, well, we've built our teams, we're embracing agile, we're equipping our teams with all of these new tools, research from IRI, are they set up for success? Well, the key component of this is that FMCG leaders, they need to have their feet in 2 places at once to successfully lead a digital transformation. On one leg, we have to continue to grow our existing business model, right? We have reframed our expectations with Wall Street. We've learned a lot coming out of the pandemic. We need to execute on our existing business and transform and create the environment to shape tomorrow's business using new digital tools. And what we've discovered is that creating a digital ready culture in FMCG requires a few specific skills. And those specific skills are in research that BTS has on our website, bts.com. But one of those skills is around digital literacy. Instead of digital being IT's job, digital is now everyone's job and requires new skill sets and mindsets and a change in mindset about innovation and experimentation. And what I want to do is just highlight quickly what those mindsets are. There's a focus on who, what, why. Why are we actually using technology? There's an ability to think divergently and embrace new thinking and ideation and new ideas. A focus on leveraging diversity and making sure we access the latent intelligence that exists across our organizations, and a focus on experimenting, learning fast and cheap. Similar to the example that we saw from P&G, where they used a model that startups use, like an Indiegogo or Kickstarter campaign, learned from it fast and cheap, and then leveraged their scale to bring this to market in a DTC manner. And it all comes back to our focus on alignment, mindset, and capability with a digital bend to it. So the final point that we'll make when it comes to digital IQ is that large firms, they tend to collect a lot of data, but they take advantage of only a fraction of that data to build insights. They have that ability to make investments, they can use their scale, whereas small digitally native firms, they have deep consumer insights, and they're built on these modern, flexible technology stacks, often based on subscriptions, and they have less layers between consumer insights and decision-making. So the combination of the two is what's powerful, right? If you're a large firm, how can you start embracing and creating a mindset and a culture amongst your leaders to embrace new digital technologies? Whereas if you're a smaller or growing firm, How can you quickly scale up? How can you continue to build on your technology stack while not losing that connection that you had to your consumer that made you successful in the first place? So today we've highlighted a few different trends that we have noticed at BTS, and certainly we have a range of learnings and insights that we've collected that we would love to continue to share with you. And most of those insights, they can be found on bts.com. And the three of us, myself, Corey, and Lance, we would always be happy to connect with you to share more of our research and find different applications for the FMCG leadership scorecard to bring to your company. With that, I'm going to open up the session for a Q&A. And I will also, after the call, send everyone, Christine Shook from our team, or BTS Events, will send you the scorecards as well to look at. The first question that we received is our definition of large versus small firms. And thank you for the question, Linda. The way we think about this I would think about it in terms of number of years in business, right? We can certainly put some sort of market cap or revenue multiple on it. But when we looked at larger companies, we looked at embedded brands, legacy brands that command really promising shelf space in most retail stores. Some of the examples we showed: Kraft Heinz, Mondelez, P&G, right? No well-known brands would fit into our big co or large firm category. Smaller firms are some of the examples we shared too, right? Upstart, before they were acquired, would have been a Dollar Shave Club, Mugsy Jeans that Corey shared. Pura, the diaper company. We think about companies that were founded since about 2015 that have quickly grown, quickly scaled up based on new digital technologies and consumer-centric thinking. Thank you for the question, Linda. Well, we certainly have time for a few more questions as folks are coming in the room. And one of the other questions that we received, maybe Corey, I'll direct this to you, but how does this impact sales in commercial organizations, was one of the questions we received in terms of some of these trends, that consumer-centric thinking, having to sell in different patterns. Anything you'd add to that, Corey?
Well, we talked a lot about consumer centricity in today's session. One thing we didn't talk about was relationships with customers. So as our teams get closer and closer to consumers and they have access to consumer data and able to translate that into insights, the way that we use it with customers is of increasing importance. I think the expectations that our retail partners or channel partners have are changing very rapidly. So I think the implications of all of this means that we need to bring a new level of conversation and a new level of strategic partnership to all of our key accounts and even customers that aren't part of our key account categories. So yeah, I think it's all a matter of how we use this to enable better customer relationships.
We've got another question that came in, and Lance, maybe you can take this one, around what have we seen companies do to upskill their current leaders and employees to create the digital mindsets? Lance, do you want to start? And maybe I can add in.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for the question. I think there's a recognition, I'll bet we've all felt it, is there's such a move to adopt technology. And it's a little bit of the horse before the cart. Or the cart before the horse, excuse me. The people don't know quite what to do with it. We think about, upskilling leaders. We think about, using that technology towards some sort of business or strategic outcome, and there's often a disconnect there. And so the work that we're doing a lot of times with our clients is very much about working with the people, working with the expectations, focusing on digital transformation in the context of what the business is trying to achieve, the consumer outcomes that we're trying to achieve, rather than just for the sake of the technology itself. Time after time after time, it's not the technology that's going to fail. That stuff is pretty much a given at this point, depending on how far you're pushing it. It's really going to be a matter of executing on it, using it appropriately, and the organization adopting it, which has everything to do with people, expectations, culture, et cetera. Bobak, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, the thing I'd add, and I brought up our 4 mindsets again, but two of the things that we really focus on when it comes to this are questions that you should be asking as leaders. And one question that we often ask leaders to say is, what's the outcome for which we think technology or a new digital output is a potential solution? There's a lot of technology out there in search of a customer, right? And we always say, like, let's start with the business or customer problem and then figure out if technology makes sense for it. And number two is we need to assess the leadership mindsets. And one of the leadership mindsets that I think are extremely important are this focus on experimenting and learning fast and cheap. And if you think about, execution the old way, right? For years in the FMCG, we used to do it this way, where we identified a new product, we forecasted an ROI, set a budget, and we started execution. And then we'd go through a stage gate process where we'd say, okay, are we on time, on budget? If not, let's work harder. Are we on time, on budget? Let's work harder. And at the end of the launch, we determine if it's a success or a failure. But that's a challenging approach, right? There's something that's wrong with that approach in today's fast-paced, more agile environment. And what we push and what we encourage our customers to think about is disciplined experimentation. Figure out your domain. Is it DTC? Is it in multi-channel marketing? Whatever it is, start building insights through customer centricity, ideate on possibilities, use diversity to strengthen your ideas, identify what are the critical assumptions that you want to test, and then design a test like what P&G had done with Indiegogo, and then test your assumptions fast and cheap. At every point in this test, you can accelerate, redirect, or cease, but you're testing some of your hardest assumptions up front using this approach. With that, I want to mention that we've gotten quite a few questions on high-level leaders being digital natives, struggling to use technologies. At BTS, we have different offerings around data-driven decision-making, around digital literacy, using artificial intelligence, demystifying it, and we'd be happy to follow up with you all regarding some of those areas, as well as what Lance covered on supply chain and strategic alignment, and what Corey covered around customer centricity. With that, thank you all so much. We had terrific attendance today for this event, and look forward to following up with you all with our FMCG scorecard so you can take that and see how your organization and your team measures up. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today.